And so it begins. The most erratic naming system for a Hollywood franchise starts right here with Too Fast, Too Furious. Let's see if turning up the action, adding a little comedy, and a proper cheesy villain can improve upon the original. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
You might want to keep your eyes on the road, Playboy.
This is a movie podcast. We are working through the first half of the Fast and the Furious franchise at the moment. So this is going to be our discussion on Too Fast, Too Furious, which is probably also going to be the start of when we complain about the way they titled these movies, because this is where it all really began in a way. Because they could have just called this the Fast and the Furious 2,
yeah,
or something, maybe the Fast and the Furious : like Florida,
Electric Boogaloo,
or something.
Vice.
But they went with Too Fast, Too Furious, and which would be fine if the next one was called Three Fast, Three Furious. But they did not do that.
This, I feel like, comes from the same exact problem of the Now You See Me movies, which apparently is now a trilogy, where they never actually considered the fact that they were going to get more. They didn't plan ahead. And so they just were like, yeah, wow, we got a second one. All right, we'll call that one Too Fast, Too Furious. And then Brian, and not the star, but like the accountant for the movie, stood up, and he was like, isn't that going to be a problem if we have a third? And it was like, shut up, Brian. We're not going to get a third one of these, you crazy?
I like how you preemptively picked the name Brian, realised that might be confusing because the character in the movie is called Brian, and instead of just picking a different name, you just specified not that Brian.
It's because even in this movie, I still can't imagine a dorkier name for a street racer than Brian. I don't understand why they went with that in the first movie. Everyone else in this movie has a cool name, and then there's Brian.
Yeah, Roman, Tej, Suki. I don't know if Suki's cool, but
yeah.
I can't hear Suki and not think True Blood, sadly.
Yeah. My girlfriend is currently finishing up rewatching that, so that's all I had the entire time she was on screen.
Suki!
Suki!
So yes, Too Fast, Too Furious. We'll start spoiler-free as we always do. Obviously there may be a few little spoilers for the first movie because it's a sequel right from the get-go, but we'll keep general spoilers for this one until we give you the warning. We have lost Vin Diesel, we've lost Michelle Rodriguez.
We lost everyone.
Well, we've kept two. We've kept Paul Walker, sadly, who's still shit and a very poor actor. Do you know what it is? Every time he says the word bro, I just die a little inside. And he says it a lot. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with saying bro. He just comes across to me as like... And it's the big t-shirt he's wearing as well. He comes across to me as like a 12-year-old from 2003, when this came out. Yeah. Who is trying to sound cool like everyone else, and just like, no, you're like some rich family's kid who like plays Gran Turismo in his bedroom. Stop it.
I feel like the biggest issue here is that once we get to like the second half of the movies, whenever we are going to get to that, I imagine he's probably going to be in like the style of the time, which is the button-down shirts and form-fitting clothes that make him look like an adult. So seeing him here is just kind of like, kid, just stop. You're like 30, man. Yeah. Stop.
It does not play well. So and he does call everyone bro, and he says it a lot. And every time he says it, I'm like, you feel like, and that would be fine if the whole point of the character is that he's like trying to sound cool and he's failing, and that was the point. That'd be fine, but he's not. He's supposed to just be cool.
If there was like a subplot of people saying like, oh, you got to grow up, you got to stop being so immature, I would 100% accept him saying bro all the time. But there isn't. Everyone is on the same level here.
So you got him, and we have Agent Bilkins, the FBI guy from the last one's back, when they were still trying to pretend that this was a movie about undercover cops.
Yep.
I'll say a franchise about undercover cops, I should say.
What's strange, though, is that the first movie, I feel like, yes, it was a plot element, and probably the main plot element, but it still felt like it wasn't that important. This movie was all in on the undercover sting operation.
Well, it had to be because they lost all the other actors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, but we introduce Roman, played by Tyrese Gibson, who is a mainstay. He is, I mean, I don't think he's in the next one, or I don't even know about the fourth, but certainly when it gets to the super, like, hero almost franchise that it becomes, he's around
once
in the
we
team.
get to the point where the titles don't have to have either the word fast or furious in them, that's when they become a mainstay.
Well, they always have one of those.
Yeah, but one or the other.
Yes.
They've suddenly decided either they can be quick or they can be angry. They can't be both.
So, and I think the other one who sticks around to some degree is Ludacris's character, Ted, who owns the garage. He's still around in some of the later movies. Every other character in this, I don't think comes. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they have some small parts or something, but certainly from memory, I don't think the other characters do. But the other ones that are introduced or Eva Mendes' character, Monica, who is an undercover agent as well. And then our villain, and that was the big difference for me in this movie, I think, is that this movie actually has a proper villain. I mean, I know that we had the Asian gang in the last one, but those were barely characters. Whereas here, this is a proper cartoony, over-the-top, like, evil guy who's threatening to kill people all the time. He's just, the rich, mob boss, bad guy, played by Cole Hauser, who I mainly just know from Pitch Black, which amusingly is a Vin Diesel movie.
I'm looking for what I know him for, because I guess it says Good Will Hunting, but I don't even remember who he was in that, so I don't think I really know him that much.
Probably a small role then, I imagine, because I don't remember him in that either. And then the other notable actor that's here is another, so there's the FBI guy, but there's also the guy from Customs who's also kind of like in charge, and that is played by James Remar, who I was happy to see because I like James Remar.
Yeah, he was good. Of course, I know him as the dad from Dexter.
Yeah, most people probably do these days. But before, he was the second Raiden. He was in the Raiden, the second Mortal Kombat movie. But he's from the Warriors. He's from he was on Black Lightning when that was on. He was like the Alfred type character in that. Like he's been popping up all over the place for decades. So very distinct voice. But
can I just throw out real quick before we move too far away from him? I was trying to figure out who the main villain reminded me of every time he popped up.
Yes.
And it's Matthew McConaughey's character from Tropic Thunder.
Okay.
Do you remember how he looked in that? He has the exact same look, like the sort of perm but still slicked back hair.
Okay,
Just general sleazy. I don't know. Every time I saw him, I just expected him to do like the all right.
Yeah, I could see it. Okay, I could see it. Otherwise, the characters aren't really that big. I mean, we mentioned Suki because she gets a little bit more time than the others, but there's a few other street racers that are interested at the start who are just kind of there to be extra bodies when stuff's going down later. She has a little bit more in that she's kind of around the garage and talks to
She's a
Brian
little bit more in
times.
that she's the only female driver in this movie, and they were like, well, we gotta put one of them in.
That's true. I mean, obviously, we have a bigger female lead, but she's not she's not in the cars. She's not driving anything.
Does she even once mention cars? Does Eva Mendes ever actually say anything about the cars in the entire movie?
She said she'll ride with you, cowboy.
That's right.
She was in a car.
There you go. She's in a car. That's all it takes.
And the passenger seat, but she was in a car. So, yeah. That is our also minor character, but we do see Flash from Batman Begins pops up at one point. Also,
in the same role.
I know he's a corrupt cop. That's his typecast apparently.
As soon as he came back into the back room in order to talk to the villain, and like he's just he doesn't even look any different. He's the same guy.
So that's basically the cast. The director's John Singleton, who I have heard of. But when I actually look up his movies, there's like nothing there that I've really seen or he's done some TV episode or TV shows and stuff. I think he's known because he wrote Boys in the Hood, but as far as directing goes, I don't think he did direct that as well, yeah. But he did he had the Shaft movie, which I have seen and I didn't like very much. He did Four Brothers with Mark Wahlberg. I think these days he's more known because he directed at least one episode of Empire. He directed some Snowfall and FX. Like I think so. Prestige TV seems to be more where he's aimed at these days. But
and then it looks as though the writers are a like a dual pair. They always work together, and they have just written. They're executive producers on the entirety of the Chicago TV series.
Oh, so they're making lots of money then. That's
Yep.
good for them, I suppose. Yeah, so with all that out of the way, I mean, the basic premise of this is that Brian's not a cop anymore. He's just a street racer because he loves that life.
Yep.
And
also he got fired. I feel like that's important.
He also got fired because he let the bad guy go before. Respect, damn it. So he is actually arrested early on in this film, and FBI guy and James Remar want him to go undercover one more time for this operation. Because obviously he's got a believable backstory now because he's actually been fired, and they already set up all this backstory with him doing. Well, that wasn't even fake, was it? He did do 2 years for something, I think.
Yeah.
So they've got all this, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to do this sting operation to catch this drug lord who's going to try and flee with all his money. We need to catch him with the money." And it's like, "Okay, fine. I want a partner." And he mentions a best friend from childhood that never came up once in the last movie.
I mean, why would he? Because I will give the movie credit is that they specifically say that they've been on the outs for years, like ever since Brian became a cop. That's true.
And there's obviously, yes, he had a life before the first movie. I have no problem with them saying he had friends or he had family or whatever. That's all fine. The only problem is that immediately when he brings them up, he sounds super important to him. And the second thing is that they go out of their way to thematically tie it to Vin Diesel's character because... Like, he has this guilt over, he became a cop and his friend went to prison, and so he sort of is not trusted him because he's the enemy now because he's a cop. Yeah. And later on in the movie when they're talking about, like, you let that guy go away back in LA, right? Is that because you felt guilty about me? He's like, yeah, that was probably part of it. Because they thematically tied it to that, it does kind of feel weird that Brian never once alluded to that he felt guilty about someone else. And, just... Yeah. Obviously he didn't because he didn't know they were going to do this, but if he did feel guilty about like a friend who he feels somewhat responsible for going away, or at least feels guilty that his friend won't trust him anymore, because it does seem relevant, like that like him respecting someone and not wanting them to go away. I feel like it does feel relevant enough that it is a little weird that there was never even like a little nod to it in the first one. Again, I mean, I know why.
Yeah,
but
clearly, I'm from a perspective of, let's say they did have both movies in mind. I guess it would come down to, from a writing standpoint, even if you knew you were doing the second thing, there would be no point where he'd turn to Dom and say like, "Yeah, my best friend got arrested, and that's why I'm letting you go as well." It's like, well, no. The only time they had post Brian revealing he's a cop is them just sitting at a stoplight about to drag race, like. That's the only time it would have come up, and clearly it wouldn't have. I get why he didn't just explain to him, by the way, you remind me of my friend Roman. He's on house arrest down the yard. Like, no, we get it.
No. But, it feels like just an allusion to the idea that there's, he's not the first person who's on the other side of the law that he's sympathized with. Just some sort of broad idea like that.
I mean, he's a street racer. Everyone that he works with is on the wrong side of the law.
Well,
it's just a matter of if they got caught. Yeah. I mean, I think the obvious reason, I think I read this somewhere, is that they came up with 2 drafts of the script, one for if Vin Diesel came back and one for if he didn't. And they shared basically the same plot. So this character is just not Vin Diesel.
Because he's given a partner he doesn't want, who doesn't know anything about cars, and he says, no, if we're doing this, I want my guy. And yeah, very clearly, if they had Vin Diesel back, he'd be like, I want Dom Toretto to be my partner in this.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would have worked. It would have made more sense as a direct sequel. Obviously now, everyone comes back a few movies later, so it doesn't really matter anymore. But at the time, you can understand why that would have been the more perfect sequel.
Can you imagine if they did this, but like they were like, look, we got to get someone back, and they brought back like the actor who played Vince, or the actor who played like some just nobody.
And
Leon.
And walks Michelle Rodriguez. Like, why'd you get me, not Dom?
That'd be okay. If only because at that point, I mean, she would have already done the first Resident Evil at that point, yeah?
Yeah, people would have known who she was, yeah.
Yeah, so she could come back as an actual name power.
But yes, so... Yeah, they even cast another bald man. Actually, I'm just thinking. If I'm thinking of Roman, which is Tyrese Gibson's character, if I'm thinking of Roman as a replacement for Dom, I'm like, yeah, he's another bald guy.
Yeah,
They
I
actually,
mean his personality is the opposite side. He is very energetic and all over the place.
I think that's an intentional choice because he effectively is the replacement for Dom. They intentionally went as far in the opposite direction as they could.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't think about Dom, which is fair. Like that's probably the smart thing to do in that case. But yes, with all that, with the setup out the way, they're going to have to pick up some money and drive it off in the big sting. But the movie builds up to that, and that's where it ultimately goes. We'll get into everything else, but David, first time watch for both of us. How did you feel about Too Fast, Too Furious?
Okay, so from my brief little research I looked into it, I found that a lot of people actually prefer this one to the first one, just in terms of it's a stupid little fun movie. Like, it's not something where you do have to get bogged down by the inter-character stuff. It's just, no, look at them. They're driving around, and for you, as a bonus, they actually turn their wheels at time. Their steering wheels.
They turned a corner in the first race, and I thought, oh, finally some drama in this race because they're actually trying to overtake each other. And it's not the only way they overtake each other either. There's a jump and everything.
Yep.
But yeah.
But as for me, I can see that. I can understand why people would look back on this as just not. It's the action follow-up to the more serious movie. I was about to make the comparison of like T2 to T1, but obviously that's much different. But it's the same sort of thing of the sequel just has more action scenes. It's more fun, I guess, than the original one was. So in that regard, I think I actually kind of preferred this one a little bit over the first one. Do I like it? It's not something... I purposely rented this movie off YouTube, and the top comment on it was, every guy has to rewatch this movie once per year out of nostalgia. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. But I will admit it was at least enjoyable.
The sad part is they're probably somewhere in our age range, whoever said that. This is someone who was like 12 when it came out, and yeah.
Meanwhile, he's driving a sedan, and he's like, I could have been Brian.
I could have been a boring ass white guy amongst much cooler people, just like Brian.
Yep.
Which that's the other thing about Robin. Is once again, he has far more charisma than Paul Walker does. So just throw that out there. Yep. Yeah, so obviously I was very vocal about how much I hated the first movie. I always did. And I would concur that this is the better movie out of the two for a couple reasons. One, it isn't as bogged down in what I think was fairly just dull, unbelievable drama from the last one. I also think it's just better paced. It crescendos to a climax at the right time in the movie. It's the complete opposite of the last movie where it felt like the third act came out of nowhere. They all just sort of, it's time for the third act now. Whereas here, they spend the entire movie building up to what the third act's going to be. So you've got that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily that good of a movie because it's still, Paul Walker's still the lead role, and that's like just unbelievable at every juncture. But I will say that while I don't really like the villain and he is far too cartoony, and I did sort of roll my eyes a few times when he was being like, I'm evil and I like cigars and blah blah blah. It did feel like, interestingly, knowing where the franchise is going to go, it did feel like the first couple of little seeds for what it will become are kind of in here. There's a couple of outrageous moments in two of the action or race sequences that are like, oh, that feels a bit more like the absurdity that's coming down the line.
Yep.
And then even the fact that there's a villain who's kind of evil and like clearly the villain of the movie. Like again, the later movies are going to have villains. Not all of them, I don't think, but a lot of them do.
The moment that they brought in Brian and they had, this is our guy, and they had like the 4 screens with like different maps and all the layers and all that, I was like, you just reused this set for the next like 15 movies. Yeah, it's definitely, and even just the idea that like, obviously recruiting them to do something is still something that comes up later in the series, although it tends to be much bigger things. It's like, we need you to steal this secret thing out of this museum, and to do it you're going to have to drive through the museum at
100 miles per hour or something.
See, I know you're probably talking about one specifically, but not knowing the series, I don't know which one, and it'll be a shock when we get there.
I don't remember any of them well enough to specify a heist, but it very much becomes that kind of thing. But obviously there's still a lot of DNA of the first one in this, mainly because they're still treating Brian like the main character, whereas I can tell you from seeing 6 and 7 that Brian is it's an ensemble movie, and Vin Diesel is the leader of the ensemble. It is not the Brian focused movie anymore.
Oh yeah.
Whereas this is still that, at least as a twofer with Roman.
I've never seen a franchise that got so many chances to just hash out exactly what it was. Like you would think, a franchise, it starts off with its first movie, it goes into sequels, and then it just kind of tries to find its way, but then ends up faltering. This series manages to keep on trying different things. Like, oh, we're going to completely change up the cast in the third movie, and then we're going to bring back the old cast in the fourth movie. And nobody ever calls it out. It's just, no, they just keep on continuing forward with what they're doing. I've never seen any franchise get that many chances to succeed.
It's almost like Universal were determined to have a franchise, and they kept making movies, and it wasn't until it's almost like they were spinning their wheels with these 2 and 3 because they wanted the whole cast back, and they finally got up with 4, and then it made enough money and it started to propel from there, and it sort of kept everyone around. Because I know this will be more relevant next time, but I know there's a post-credit scene, I think, in 3 with Vin Diesel, and if I remember correctly, they got him to do that because they let him make whatever the next Riddick movie was. He wanted to do a Riddick movie, and they said, "We'll let you do it if you do a little scene in a Fast and Furious movie." But it's so funny though, because I'm pretty sure Fast Furious 4 through what will be 11 eventually will be by far the most lucrative thing Vin Diesel has ever done, and he's probably thankful they forced him into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's insane. I said this last time, but it's insane how everyone kind of left and they came back, but they're probably all so thankful it became the juggernaut that it did, because they're probably all making a fortune off of it versus what they might have been doing otherwise. So, it is so weird. So judging this movie is kind of a weird just analysis of what this was before it became what it was going to become. And where it's transitioned from the first movie, how far along is it? It's definitely a little bit sillier, it's a bit more over the top. It's nothing compared to what it's going to become, but there's definitely elements of those things. One of the interesting things that I was noting as well, because, minor spoiler for future movies, but Brian and, what's Dom's sister's name? Mia?
Oh, yeah, Mia.
So they're going to be, together at some point in the future, right? They're going to treat them like their soulmates, effectively. So it's really funny watching this one where they're sort of joking about it as if Brian just always falls for whatever woman's involved in his case, because he's fallen for Eva Mendes in this one just like he fell for Mia in the last one. And I thought that was kind of funny, given that later on they're going to treat Mia like no, they're life partners, they're going to be destined to be together. But clearly at this point they didn't know they were going to have her back, so they're just treating it as a joke.
With a show or with a franchise going this long, I do almost want to compare it to TV shows where it's oh no, on this season they couldn't get this actress back because she had some other obligations, so we introduced this little half love interest for this season just to more further the real love interest later on. Now obviously they had no clue whether or not they were going to be able to get Mia back, but
yeah. How did you feel about Eva Mendes? I don't know if I think she's not terrible or anything, but I think she's good either.
Yeah, so the whole thing is that people tell us throughout this movie of her character being duplicitous, of her being, is she actually still working undercover, or did she go native?
This actually might be the worst plot point of this whole movie, because it's just, it's all forced in dialogue, and I especially felt like Roman constantly brings it up. He's see, she was clearly enjoying that. There's a scene in this movie, we'll get into it in spoilers later, but there's a scene in this movie where they're all with the villain when he's doing something really bad. And after the scene, Roman's see, she was into that. And I'm I just watched the scene. She looked terrified the entire time. What are you talking about?
She didn't seem like she was into that at all.
So I'm this just feels like a made-up plot point. That it's almost like you shot all of these scenes talking about her maybe being a bad guy later, and none of the rest of the movie matches it at all.
Yeah, I feel like there might have supposed to have been a scene where where Eva Mendes' character betrays the two of them and like gives them some false info or something, but it just never happened. Everything she did was on the straight and narrow, but every other person was just like, nah, she's sleeping with the bad guy. That means she's bad too. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they kept bringing it up, and I'm like, nothing in the movie is actually supporting this suspicion. I don't know. Like, I've not seen a damn thing.
But because of that, you asked me what I thought of Eva Mendes' character. I thought she did a very poor job of playing a duplicitous character because there was nothing there. She just seemed like she was up and up the whole time.
Yeah, that's fair. Although I question if that was actually originally in the script when she was playing the role.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the thing. It doesn't feel like she comes across poorly in terms of, like, you know, she doesn't sound... She's not like Brian in some scenes. Like, Paul Walker in some scenes just sounds like he's really, not phoning it in, but he's, like, faking it. Like, he's really trying hard to be the cool action movie lead, and he just isn't really quite suited to the role. Yep. She never comes across as that. It just feels that she's playing a different character than what the rest of the cast are telling us she is. So, I don't know, something got lost somewhere in translation. Whether it was, like, rewrites after she'd already played most of her part or something, I don't know.
I mean, there was, no real spoilers, but at the very end of this movie, she turns to Roman and is just like, do you believe me now? And I'm like, okay, so she knew about the plot, I guess. She was aware. But
that's true.
At no other point in her entire performance does it seem like she's anything but 100% devoted to her job. So if this was added in post, she did a fine enough job with Undercover Officer. If, however, she was told beforehand, you're supposed to be a little duplicitous, I didn't buy it for a minute.
No. Yeah, it's like they were trying to, like, create some extra drama because they didn't think they had enough. They're like, oh, we need some other, like, potential hurdle for the characters to get over.
Well, I think it was supposed to be a thing of, you know, we had the last movie where Brian fell for Mia being, you know, they're star-crossed lovers. One's a cop and one's in this crime life. How are they going to ever be able to survive? They just wanted that same sort of thing again, where it's, oh, Brian's on the up and up, but is this woman he's into also there?
Well, yeah,
who knows?
That's the drama, is that they're trying to suggest that she's turned to respect the people she's with, like he did in the last movie. But the people she's with are much worse, obviously.
And that there's an interesting story there they could have explored of going back on, hey, you let the bad guy get away. You went native in the last movie. This girl's doing the same thing. Where's the moral line that you could draw? Where they're like, how do you say that she's worse than you were then? And there's an interesting story there, but they just never press on it.
No. The movie, and almost, in some ways it's for its benefit, because I think if it got bogged down in it, it would probably go into the dreary territory the last one get into, that I thought was quite dull. And it's not to say that there's not story potential there, it's just I don't think the writing of this movie was maybe up to the task of actually handling it. So keeping it to, wisecracking, car duo. Honestly, if I have one kind of broad question that kind of pokes at the plot of this movie that I don't quite understand, that they never ever once even try to explain, is that right from the get-go, this bad guy wants two drivers to transport his money, right? Two drivers and two cars, and that's the plan the whole time, is that they're going to take two cars and whatever. And that leads us to, like, oh, Brian needs like a second, and that's why we get his buddy in, and that's our duo, our lead duo. But at no point in the movie did they ever, like, I was just thinking, like, why not just one car? There's not that many bags of money, it can fit in one. And the only explanation that I could sort of, like, put in myself was that, well, in case one of them gets caught, the other half of the money still gets to the bad guy. But they also drive the entire time, like, side by side, so the chances are if one's getting caught, the other one is too. It's not like they take different routes. So I don't know why. It's just there because the movie needs it to be too.
Here's the thing. The entire plot of this movie fails on the most basic level, because when we get to the point where they say what the plan is take the money from this third person's house at point A and meet me at the airstrip. And then we will I'm going to take the money and leave. That's the entirety of the plan. And the cops want to catch him with the money in order to link him to all these crimes. That's why they need to make the arrest at the airstrip. But we clearly see that the car that they're driving in makes it to the airstrip without any sort of issues. So there's no reason he couldn't have brought the money himself down to the airstrip.
That's
Like,
that's a good point.
There's no reason for this plot to exist except that I think he thinks he has eyes on him, and he does. But at that point, they're still going to have eyes on you at the airstrip. So I don't understand any of what the reason we needed these drivers was to begin with. And it's not like it's a cross-country trip where you need skilled drivers to be able to make it. It's at most 20 minutes away, it seems.
Yeah, they do go on the highway, but not for that long a time. Yeah, it's just it's not a huge trip, but so that was just something that was occurring to me as I was watching it. But yeah, the action's a bit more, over the top. There's a couple of key moments where it goes a bit nuts. It does start off with a typical street race, although the rest of the movie's not about street racing per se. It's just kind of the world that Brian's in now, and has people to sort of rely on, at certain points.
You mean like a family?
We're not quite there yet. We're not in family territory. But we'll get there. We'll get there. It's definitely an easier watch than the first one, and it's it's not as annoying, I would say. There's definitely, don't get me wrong, I remember I was a little worried that I was going to be just as annoyed, because the opening 10 minutes are the worst parts of the first movie, where it's just lots of music playing as lots of people like working their cars, cleaning their cars, a lot of sexy babes bending over their car hoods and things like that.
Everyone presses the button and goes into warp speed in there.
Yeah. There's a lot of that, but it's kind of limited for the most part to that first 15 minutes, and then it kind of is like, okay, we've got a plot now, so let's actually just focus on that, which was to its benefit. I don't think it's necessarily a great movie, and I think or even a good movie, and that's largely just down to the characters themselves, particularly Brian, but the characters themselves and what they're actually doing is not that interesting. And while it does focus more on its plot, which is built, and I like the pacing of the plot in that it builds up to this plan. So it's kind of like a heist movie essentially. We've got this plan, we're building up to it. That focus is good, but at the same time, everything with the villain and the poor implementation of which side is she on? That stuff feels so undercooked that I do think the plot feels really half-baked as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the issue. You've got to run the gambit of, you have to have the plot be interesting and complex enough that it's not just immediately predictable, but you also need it to be easy enough to follow that these action scenes can just have you turn your brain off and you don't think about, oh, well, this person's doing this thing this time. The first movie went more on the complexity, less on the action. This one went more on the action and left the plot out to dry. Yeah.
So, still not good, but I will say it was an easier watch than the first one. And I would definitely mark it a little bit higher, which, I wasn't sure I was going to say that about it, so I'm at least slightly positive.
I mean, any movie that replaces the word 2 with the number 2, you're already going in with low expectations.
I'm trying to think of another example. Was there another example?
I know there's been at least one. I can't remember what it is. I don't know.
I can't think of one, but yeah.
Boys to Men.
That wasn't a sequel. As opposed to the first movie, which is Boys One Men?
Yeah. Boys the Man.
Okay. So I guess we'll give the spoiler warning and start talking about the rest of the movie then. So full spoilers for Too Fast, Too Furious, you have been warned. So, like I say, the movie opens with and they give Brian this the hero entrance, right? So there's a street race going on, and Ludacris plays Tej, who's running the street race, and he's sort of getting the bets in. But there's only 3 racers, and once again, and this was a lot of this in this movie in multiple different groups, but the Power Rangers color coding, where each car is a bright different color, so they're really distinct. But what really got me about this actually is that in this opening street race, not only do you have each car, so Suki's car, I think I want to say hers was pink. Maybe I'm just thinking that because she's the girl, but like I think she was pink. I think we've got the guy from Prison Break, the Hispanic guy. He had like an orange car, I think, and then the other dudes.
I think green, maybe.
He was like green, and then Brian showed up and he's grey. But what really got me is that not only did they have the distinct colors of car, is that when they were just about to start racing, I thought that like behind Suki there was a bunch of girls wearing pink like her car. And behind like the orange car there was people wearing orange, and I noticed that when it got to Brian, he's just wearing a white t-shirt, like he's got a big white t-shirt on, and I know it looked like behind him there was just a bunch of people wearing like white shirts, and I thought that's not even a dress like code or a uniform. It's just like I don't know, they were going like it was like they had pit crews but they're street racers. Anyway, so the point
it's like the Warriors.
The point I was getting at. Hey, we got Ajax is in it, so why not?
Yeah.
But the point I was getting at is that they're short a driver. They need to have 4 people for some reason, and they're going to call the race off. And I'm like, it's a street race. What you got regulations you follow here?
Hey, if we learned anything from John Wick season, it's that every illegal anything has a code that they strictly adhere to.
So he's like, sorry, I think I've got someone who can fill in. So he calls up Brian, but they sort of shoot him like you don't see his face. He's just like silhouette, or he's shot from behind. And he's like, hey, there's a race on. Do you want in? And he's like, yeah, be here in 5 minutes. And he like races down to the start line, and he shows up, and everyone's like, oh my god, it's Brian. It's like, okay, so in Florida, he's like, you know, hot shot. He's the Dom of Miami.
Yeah. See, okay, this is what got me, and it's a thing that continues out through this whole movie, is that they keep on pointing out like, oh man, Brian, he's such a good driver, despite the fact that he was crap when we were in California. But even beyond that, in the very first scene that we see Brian in the last movie, he points out how in his car, before he's learned any skills at all, he caps out at 140 miles per hour. Then they show these car speedometers, and they're barely cracking 100, like multiple times throughout this movie.
That makes sense then in a weird way, because it's like he's went down to the lower league.
Yeah,
he's now the big fish in the smaller pond. That's what they've effectively done here. Miami's street racing scene is not as elite and prestigious as California's apparently.
That being said, they came up with a much better solution for blocking off roads in that they just stole some road closed signs.
Yeah, this was even more organized and like considerate, because this was like, no, people, you know, like, we've got all these road closed signs. We're going to like, it's like, this is way better than just having the cars blocking the streets.
There's no Pizza Hut guy who's going to be complaining.
Yeah, Rob Cohen, piss off. So. Yeah, like they have the race. They kind of kill it on the whooshing effect, except for when they turn on the NOS, and then it's like they go to warp speed, and it's a bit silly. But they do have to turn corners though. They're trying to overtake each other, and I will also say that I feel like they did a better job, and maybe it's because they're so like cartoony and they're all different bright colors. But I felt like they did a better job here of establishing the 4 different, obviously we know Brian, but they've established the 3 other characters enough that, you know, even the fight for 3rd and 4th place felt like there was a little bit to it, because it was like, okay, it was Suki and it was the Hispanic guy, and they were trying to overtake each other. There was at least a little bit of context for those 2 in the back as well. It wasn't just, just because there's more cars behind them.
See, in the sense of the movie, I get it as to why it's, even in the back you're fighting for it, but the prize is winner takes all. So I don't understand why they were vying between 3rd and 4th place.
Respect, David.
I guess.
Because whoever comes last is the little bitch. And obviously...
That being said, 2 of them did not finish, so...
That's true. Well, that's the thing. There's a gimmick at the end of this. Like, so I love that in later movies we're going to be driving on like frozen ice. We're going to be like dodging missiles. But in this movie... Like, okay, we're going to up the last movie by just having a little bit of a jump. We're going to have a little jump at the end.
It's got a 15-foot drop off a ramp. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, Tej is got connections. He's got someone who works at the bridge to like raise the bridge a little bit, so they've got a jump at the end. Which, if I was when Suki lands, especially because she does make the jump, she's only the second. Well, there is another guy who jumps, but he doesn't land properly. He ends up getting into a ditch or whatever.
Yeah.
But Suki makes the jump and she lands, but not as well as Brian does, and the entire front of her car just kind of falls off. And I'm like, if I was her, because they didn't know there was going to be a jump. Like this was a surprise to all the drivers.
Oh yeah.
So if I was her, and we know these people are pumping silly money into their vehicles. I would be pissed.
Oh yeah. And that's the one guy who didn't finish. You said the guy from Prison Break, I think.
Yeah.
He just doesn't do it. He's like, nah, screw that. And he just turns off to the side of the road. He'd rather not finish than try to make that jump.
Which makes sense to me. He's like, yeah, this is going to ruin my car. I'm not doing this.
I'm sorry, I'm good. And they actually say right before the race of how much money everyone's been putting into their cars. So it would 100% make sense of like, I have no chance to win the prize money, and I'm going to possibly wreck my car. I'm out.
Yeah. Because the other guy, the one who's kind of competing with Brian, what's his name? Slapjack, apparently, according to IMDb.
I don't think they ever said it.
No, but like there's a line with him and his girlfriend, whoever, where she's like, "You have to win this. We need to pay rent this month." And I'm like, "Stop putting so much money in your car if you're struggling to pay rent."
Not even that. Right when they arrive, Brian says like, "How about we raise the stakes a little bit?" And they raise the stakes explicitly to $3,500 per driver. And I'm like, "That's not enough to make rent in 2003. Just sit the race out, bro. That's all you got to do."
Yeah, it almost feels like he's like trying to price them out. He's like, let's raise the stakes, and all the other three are all like, wait, what? No one said about raising it. We're all like struggling.
This isn't California, man. Jesus.
The humidity alone here means we spend way more on air conditioning. Come on.
Yeah.
It's just. So yeah, but this is basically just the scene to give you a street race as your introduction, which is fine. Like I have no problem with that.
No.
But Eva Mendes is like watching Brian from the crowd, and it's like, oh, why is she staring at him? Who is this? But then the cops show up, and they specifically chase Brian, and they set up these electric like bolts that they fire at cars to.
So this is just magic. Like this is actually just magic.
But James Remar shows up, and the first thing you see him do is whip out this giant bolt cannon thing.
It's a grappling hook that's electrified that latches into the car and somehow disrupts their entire electrical system.
Yes.
However, the part that gets me is, as we'll see later on in this movie, it's not like hooked up via a cord to like a power source that they've got back there. It's self-contained.
Yeah, it's just
all
on its
just
own.
in the hook. That's the part that gets me, that makes it magic.
Here's a
'Cause
question.
you need a lot of volts to make a car completely die.
Assuming it worked here, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you did this to like an electric vehicle, let's say a Tesla, because it's the most common one. If you fired this at a Tesla, would it either be more effective because it's entirely functioning on electricity, or would it supercharge it like Thor firing at Iron Man?
I think it would be more effective, not because it's all on electricity, but because the electricity would cause the battery in the car to explode, and everyone would die.
Fair point.
That's what would happen.
Fair point. Fair point. So what you're saying is when Thor zapped Iron Man and he's like, "Oh, I'm supercharged. Thanks for it." What should have happened is his heart should have exploded.
What should have happened is that the lithium batteries that he keeps in his back just straight up explodes.
And before some nerds correct me, I know that he's got a fancy fictional arc reactor, which is like a super battery that could probably handle it. Blah blah blah.
Blah.
Yeah. So they arrest Brian, and I want to point out like a really weird directing choice here. So they get him to pull over. They surround him with cars, and he puts his hands up. It does this thing where it cuts in like 3 times really quickly into his eyes, and I'm not. Oh, pardon me. I'm not sure why that because it's almost like they're doing the almost like the Kill Bill thing where it's zooming into the eyes, right?
Yeah.
But it's these quick cuts into the eyes, and it just felt like so stylistically like nothing else in the rest of the movie. And it was early in the movie that I thought, oh, maybe they'll do more things like that, but it was just kind of on its own and standalone, and it didn't fit anything that was in the first movie either. So it really stuck out to me as a weird little touch.
The only thing it reminded me of was kind of like the GTA game over thing. You know, you get arrested by the police and then the screen just like goes gray and it's like game over, busted, stuff like that. I feel like it was that kind of vibe where it was like, ah, crap, Brian actually got arrested. This is the end of the line for him. And they were just trying to do like almost a video game-esque, like, this is it sort of thing.
Yeah, it was really weird. It was just overly dramatic too.
Yeah, the fact that they don't do it at any other point felt very out of place. But like you said, it was early enough on in the movie that I don't think in the moment it really bothered anything.
Yeah, it stuck out a little bit to me as just being really over the top as like a direction choice, but then it got worse when I got to the end and went, oh wait, like there was nothing else like that the entire time. But yeah, they give him this choice, or not even a choice, but they want to use him to go undercover and take down this guy. We'll clear your record, blah blah blah. Yeah. And he wants his friend. So they go to this destruction derby that Roman is in, and Roman's not happy to see Brian. He immediately wants to fight him, and we effectively get and I think this is just showing that this movie has a little bit more personality than the last one, and the fact that they have this sort of like fight, which is not a serious fight, very quickly. It's just them rolling around in the dirt like a couple of kids with the FBI guy just kind of like
he's
enjoying the show.
Literally eating popcorn.
He is, yeah,
and watching them eat.
So
I'm reminded of the fight scene between Brian and Vince in the first one, where it is kind of that same sort of feel. It doesn't feel like it's choreographed. It's just the two of them rolling around on the ground.
Yeah, together. But that one was meant to be taken more seriously, though.
It was. This one was because you had the FBI director just eating popcorn nearby. Yeah, it felt like a joke.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you might even argue that this is kind of poking fun at that scene in the last movie. You know.
Yeah, possible.
But yeah, they bring him in. He's not happy to work with Brian. In fact, that was one of the other things that I'd probably again critique the movie for, is that I kind of felt like his turn to where he just started like liking Brian again just kind of suddenly happens, like for no real reason.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a few scenes. He doesn't do it as they say, "Hey, are you in or are you out?" It takes a while.
He keeps sniping him with like comments for a while, but it just kind of turns to a certain point where like they're high-fiving each other and like they've got each other's backs all of a sudden. In fact, it's the same with eventually there's a kiss between Eva Mendes and Brian, and even though they've been kind of teasing there's a flirtation, the kiss comes out of goddamn nowhere.
That one was way standout for me too. As soon as they kissed, I was like, I'm sorry, did I miss the first 3 of these? Because that kiss was just kind of like no, we've done this already.
Yeah, it felt like a kiss goodbye because they're worried they're not going to see each other again or something like that, and I'm like,
yeah.
You've not kissed yet, though. You've barely even admitted that there's like a feeling or something here.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought they were going to go the route of there was no feeling between them, because the only thing that they showed up until then was basically Eva Mendes getting a little bit handsy at one point in a club, and that's it. That's all they had.
Yeah, it was that, and Brian, when they're driving in the car together, Brian, to show off, does the I'm going to stare at you and speed up, which I just thought was very reckless. Like I was I was sitting thinking, you're going to hit some poor child on the road because you're not looking. And
I'm sure somewhere out there's a recut video on YouTube of this scene, and it's just him colliding with a bunch of like pedestrians the whole way down, and just keeps staring at Eva Mendes the whole time.
And she keeps staring back at him as well. Yeah. There's almost like the Scary Movie version of this scene where they could redo it, but he's hitting grannies and stuff on the way. But they're just staring at each other into their eyes the entire time. Don't give a shit.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're given cars that are repossessed or something.
Which okay? So later on in the movie, they'll trade out for different cars, but these are undercover operatives in South Miami. I understand that they are still racing cars, but like, they didn't think, hey, maybe if we're going to be driving drugs or money or whatever this guy is going to want, we should have, I don't know, a Honda Civic. We should have a basic car that's going to blend into traffic. It just seemed weird to me that the government's like, no. We know you need neon yellow and bright royal purple. That's what's going to make you non-noticeable.
Yeah, it was green and purple, and the reason why I remember... Green. Is because they revealed them at the same time, and I went, "Oh, Joker colors."
Fair enough.
Yeah, and obviously it's set up quite early on that these vehicles are like being tracked. They've got trackers on them, and what the rest of it. So right away they're driving to the bad guy. There's an audition with some other goons who are all driving. And again, this is what I was saying earlier. How right from the get-go he wants 2 drivers because it's the best pair that wins. But he gives them this test job, which is, my car was impounded a few days ago. There's something important in the glove box. So whoever goes and gets it and brings it back first, gets the job or has the chance of getting the job. So we get our sort of first big action sequence, which is all these, like, there's like 4 pairs of guys all racing to get to this impound to get whatever this item is. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff on the highway where they're dodging like trucks, they're weaving in and out of traffic. The big thing, of course, is that at this point, Brian and Roman are still kind of like, Roman's still being kind of competitive with him because he's still mad at him. So there's some dodgy driving from those two. Towards the end of it, for example, Brian, to show off, does a 180 and starts speeding backwards in front of him, giving him the finger.
What? That's like, I would be more okay with it if, even in the plot of the movie, it was just an empty stretch of highway and like he's just doing it to show off because there is nobody else around. But like, not 20 seconds before he decides to flip around and show off, we have one of the other drivers get crushed by a semi under the back wheels.
Yeah, it's actually an impressive little moment. It's so basically Brian and Roman have both driven in between 2 semi trucks, right? So they've went through and sort of thread the needle. But the trucks have sort of seen them and they're started to like move closer together to be like, F these guys. So the guy behind them tries to squeeze through and gets kind of like squished and starts to scrape. And then he sort of like turns into the wheels, and the back wheels of the semi truck just go over him and just crush the car.
And it's an actual, at least it seems like an actual car was used.
It looks like a stunt, yeah. It looks like they had like a, obviously there's no driver in it, but yeah, it looks like an actual sort of bit of demolition that they've done. Which, you know, cool, fun. But yeah, there's multiple points. Maybe I'm just an old man, but there's multiple points in this movie where I'm like, Brian, this is dangerous driving. What are you doing? You're going to get someone killed.
I'm all for the dangerous driving if it's just for pure recreational stuff. But like, their sole purpose is to get there as fast as possible and bring back this thing. And they're just, if not putting themselves in danger, bringing attention to themselves to get pulled over. There's no reason for them to do it.
They're flaunting things a bit. You're right on that point. I think I look at it kind of like, you know, heroes with guns, right? A hero shouldn't want to kill as many people as possible, but he'll do it if the situation calls for it. You know, John Wick, he's not going to go out and kill people just for the fun of it. He's not trying to show off. But when he's put in a situation, he'll do it. He'll take out the bad guys because it seems necessary. Right. I feel like the fancy, like, overly stunt driving should be like that as well, where it's like, you know, I'm that good and I can do anything, but I'm not going to put lives in danger. You know, innocent civilians who are driving on the highway, I'm not going to just put them in danger because I want to show off. Like, it should be, no. I have to pull off these fancy moves because it's life or death in this moment, you know? But it wasn't life or death in this moment. It was just, I'm going to turn around and flip him off because...
Like, if there was a scene where one of the other drivers comes up on Brian's rear and does, like, a pit maneuver on him, and it forces him to drive backwards for a little while, I'd be okay with that.
Oh, sure,
because that's him then doing it for the sole purpose of getting there. But instead, they have multiple angles of him driving backwards, flipping the bird out the window, just for no reason. Besides, hey, isn't this cool?
Yep. So...
And I also want to point out at this point, because the cars are low jacked, the federal agents are looking at the GPS and they're like, crap, they're trying to run. This
annoyed me so much. Because as soon as James Remar said, these assholes are trying to run, I'm like, no, they're literally doing, like, they're being tested by the back. Didn't Eva Mendes tell you this was going to be the test? Like, what?
Even if she didn't know it was the test, just viewing what they would have seen is that their cars arrive and park at the guy's estate. They're there for about 3 minutes, and then they all of a sudden take off going somewhere else.
Yeah, they went there first. Yeah, if they were going to run, why wouldn't they just run immediately?
Yeah. But no.
It really upset me. You gave them cars, and then you think they're suspicious because they're driving.
Yeah, and later on when he's trying to explain it, he doesn't. He just says, "I thought you guys were running," and they're like, "Well, okay." It's like, that's not an explanation. No, this was the plan, guys. What did you think was going to happen?
Oh, Jesus. So yeah, they get to the car. The other guys aren't very happy that they've got there first, so they try to shoot them.
Mm-hmm. Well, they pull out their guns, and then Remar shows up.
Yeah, then the FBI or whatever shows up, and they start shooting. And I guess they wanted some drama, because, like... So Roman, like, fires a few shots back towards the FBI guys, but doesn't hit anything. even in the moment, I'm like, oh, I get. He's probably just like trying to make it look convincing that they're not working with the cops, right? That's what he's doing. And later on, when they're in an interaction with everyone again, like Remar gets upset and like grabs and says, "Don't you dare shoot at me! I'm a federal agent." Blah 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 blah. And I feel like it just immediately gets dropped. No one kind of explains anything. He never actually just says, "I was trying to make it look convincing that I wasn't working with you, dipshit." You know? Because I think Brian does say if he wanted to shoot you, you would be dead, which I guess is all we get to say, oh, that's what he was doing. He was firing some phony shots just to make it look whatever. Yeah. But yeah, the whole thing's whatever. So yeah, turns out what they got from the car was just a cigar. Which our villain says, yes, you're in now. You're going to be the drivers, and we're going to do this plan, and I'll pay you $100,000 for delivering that package to me. And blah blah blah. That's basically it. There's little moments though, like throughout where, like because Brian's clearly checking out Eva Mendes, and the villain's with her, he's getting all jealous, and he's like, "She's a beautiful woman, isn't she?" Yeah, she's gorgeous. And then he gets jealous because she touched Brian's shirt at one point. You know, she like did his button up.
And that's what I'm saying. That's the only thing that happened that led to there to be any sort of anything.
And he's like, "You ever touch another man again, I'll kill you." He's comically villainous, like he really is. Like, and I'm not saying that he's unrealistic, because there's absolutely guys who think like that, but he is just comically villain in the movie. So
at that point, they go back to the garage to basically figure out, hey, can we get the LoJack off of this car? And they say, no, it's wired into every single system. The FBI is going to know where you are no matter what. And then for some reason, the bad guy, which he has a name, Verone's guys show up at the garage because they were tailing them. And Roman lights their windshield on fire so that they can get away to talk to the FBI guys.
I mean, it worked. They couldn't follow them with the windshield on fire.
I mean, yeah, but it's just... out of all the things I expected out of that scene, he comes up, he does like spraying some cleaning solution or something on there, and then he just lights it on fire. I didn't expect that one. It caught me off guard. I'll give it that.
Yeah, so at this point in the movie, they're kind of talking like maybe they're just going to like run with the money, right? They're not going to actually turn it into the FBI or whatever. And they sort of tease that they might do that. Of course, at the end, they choose not to, and it's like, oh no, we're actually noble, and we, you know...
Yeah.
We made sure they weren't going to screw us, so we won't screw them, kind of thing. But there is a portion where they're thinking, yeah, we need other cars so we can get away. And I feel like, Brian, you've been winning a lot of money in these street races. Can't you just go and like pick up a car? But instead, we get this section in the middle, right, where two of the guys that were competing with for the job before, the two that they kind of mentioned the most, they called him Fonzie. That's not his name, but that's what they called him. Like
Fonzie and Fabio.
Yeah. It's like, hey, we're going to race you for pink slips, and they arrange a race which Tej kind of like referees, and you know Suki's there as well, and it's basically this like sort of tag team thing where, all right, the first drivers are going to go up to this point, go around the barrel, come back, and it's not until they come back to this lane can the second drivers go, and then whoever team gets back first wins, basically.
Yep. Gets both cars.
So. Is it okay? Fair enough. The only thing I really want to point out here is there's a decent enough little scene where, you know, at first Roman is losing and gets back really late. So Brian's kind of got his work out for him. So he has to play chicken because the other guy's already turned and is way back. So Brian has to play chicken with him to try and get him off the road to have a chance of catching up, which he does. The thing that really stuck out to me though is I can't remember if it was, I think it maybe in the first two. So it was when Roman was racing the first guy, but. He does like he does something that feels like it breaks physics a little bit. Where there's like
when he runs into the sign.
Yeah, there's like a sandwich board at the side of the road, and he kind of hits the side of it and makes it spin round so it like lands on the road in front of the car behind him. And I'm like, I feel like if you hit the side of that sign, it would just fly off the way you hit it. It wouldn't spin and land on the road.
Well, here's the thing. If a car hits the side of the sandwich sign and it goes flying pretty easily into the middle of the road, that tells me the sign is not all that heavy. So even as Roman, I would just be like, I'm just going to run through the sign.
Yeah.
There's no big deal here. But no, for some reason, has to throw it off to the side of the road and loses 10 seconds.
Yeah, it feels like it's so precise the way he makes it land just in front. It's like he's playing pool and he's done like a little trick shot where he just makes it land in front of him. And I'm like, there's no way you can be that precise with the corner of the car. Come on now.
It felt to me like one of the video game puzzles where, like, you know, the very end of the puzzle is you got to push down like a tower or something like that forms a bridge to something else. It's like, okay, well, you probably could aim it a little bit, but there's nothing to say that should ever work like that.
Yeah. It just stuck out to me. But yeah, they win the pink slips and leave these guys standing there with no cars. You never see them again. That's just the end of their tenure.
Yep. Well, they are no longer fast. They are only furious.
Yes, the two that won the cars are two fast people, and the two remaining are two furious people.
There you go. That's why the numbers are in the title. We're actually counting off this scene.
So they go to this like fancy club that the villain wants to talk to them, and this is where the slight bonding between Brian and Monica happens. But the main part of this is that Flash from Batman Begins is this corrupt detective whose job it is, from the villain's perspective, is to give them the 15-minute window to pull off, like, so that, because he's got eyes on him, he wants all the eyes pulled away from him for 15 minutes so that they can achieve this goal.
Okay, so I have two thoughts on that. The first one, I just want to go back ever so slightly to when they start meeting in the club, because this was the most awkward line read for me, like, just in the entire movie, where Eva Mendes, Roman, and Brian are all just standing in the front room of the club talking. And then Roman says something, I don't even know what, that pisses off Eva. So they just stand there for like 5 full seconds. And then Roman says, I'm going to go take a piss. And then he just leaves the scene. I don't know what it was about that scene, but I was like, did we just forget to say cut? I don't know what happened.
I think that's when he implies she's sleeping with the enemy or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I understand wanting to play it off for an awkward beat, but it needs to be awkward for the characters, not for the audience. I felt like there was an issue with the editing of that scene.
No, that's fair. That's fair. The main thing though is this torture scene, because the cop's saying he can't do it. He can't like take all the eyes off them. And his method of torture is to put a rat on his stomach and then put a bucket over the rat, and then it's a metal bucket. So he starts with a blowtorch on the bucket, the idea being that the rat will eventually start gnawing his way through his stomach to try and get away from the hot bucket. Very a lot. Surely there's easier ways of torturing someone, but fine.
I mean, he obviously knows who the wife and his kids are. I feel like that would be the easier way to go. Just be like, hey, we've got a guy trained on your wife and kids, and he'll kill them if you don't do what we say. But no, we need an immediate psycho moment so that we can really know that Verone is not playing around here.
Yeah, this is not Dom from the last movie. This is a proper villain. So yeah, and Eva Mendes is asked to like hold his mouth shut whilst he's screaming, and she does it, but she clearly looks uncomfortable the entire time. And this is after this scene where Roman's like, "See, she was into that sick shit. She's got a fetish for violence," and I'm like, "What are you talking about? She looked disturbed the entire time."
Even if she didn't, Brian makes the obvious comeback of like, she's also undercover. She needs to play the role, man. That's what she's here for.
Yeah. So I guess now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's not as much of a weird inconsistency as I thought. But when I was watching the movie, I got confused because a big part of the plan when all this starts happening, right, is they get the money from this location, which is just this little RV style home out wherever, and they've got the money in the cars, and they're like the local police.
Well, you skipped over the one best scene in the movie, which is Paul Walker wakes up to Eva Mendes next to him in bed, and she warns him that she overheard that Verone is going to shoot them after they deliver the money to the airstrip. And this is the first time we've heard anything about the airstrip. She's saying that's the end goal. We're going to this airstrip. So as she's there warning him, Verone's guys show up and start poking around because I guess they realize she was gone and they think she might have come here to, I guess, make out with Paul Walker, but
Roman thinks that as well. He walks in and sees her and immediately just thinks, oh, she spent the night here.
But like they didn't, but then they still kiss as if they did. That's what bothers me.
Yeah. No, I wasn't even intentionally trying to skip over it. I was thinking, because we were talking about this plan and stuff, I was, the part of the plan that I had a problem with is there's a whole big plan that once the police start chasing them, the local cops immediately come after them once they've got the money. And all I could think, first of all, is why haven't the FBI just told the local cops? I mean, I guess because they're worried about a mole to tell them the bad guy. Okay,
which is fair, that earlier.
Which is fair enough. But I thought this whole, I need 15 minutes of time so that they can drive the stuff to me, I thought that included, like, this part of it as well. I didn't get that this, because they have a whole plan in place to trick the cops because they're expecting to be followed that involves a lot of street racers driving a lot of cars, right? Yeah. And I thought, wait, why were you assuming you were going to get, like, followed? Because I thought the whole point was you had 15 minutes of, like, time to do it without...
Well, that was the thing in the movie. This one I think actually was explained in that.
Okay, go on.
They had the dirty cop and they said, okay, dirty cop, you work for me and you have all of these guys who are watching me, but because you're in control of them, I'm never actually caught. I need you to pull them off and make sure they don't do anything for just 15 minutes. And that's what he agrees to at the end of the torture scene. But when it comes time for the actual scene, all the people are calling in saying there's movement at the house, there's movement, should we move in? And he goes, no, everyone stay put, no one do anything. And it's only after he gets a crisis of conscience that he's like, damn it, all right, everyone move in. He actually disobeyed Verone in that scene, and he didn't give him the full 15 minutes.
Okay.
That's what happened there.
Well, no, I still feel like he did what he was supposed to, though, because, like, Verone still got away undetected to his boat, right? So he's waiting by his boat.
But the whole thing is that it's not about Verone, it's about getting the money out of that neighborhood. That's what was supposed to be the 15 minutes for them to be able to get the money out of that neighborhood and onto the road.
But what are they swooping in to arrest them for exactly in this scene?
Because they know that those are Verone's people. They're not coming in to arrest Verone, they're just coming in to stop this massive drug money being moved. That's why the FBI is so pissed off, because the local PD is jumping the gun and they're making it so they can't actually arrest Verone.
See, this doesn't feel like it's as straightforward or as explained as you're saying it as it is.
I mean, maybe it's not, but I felt like I followed it pretty straightforward. Maybe I'm just linking together things the movie never actually did.
I get the local PD are like jumping the gun. I get that part, but it just... I thought that this also was included in the 15 minutes thing. I didn't get that he... I don't know. Like, I thought...
You thought that the entire operation, all the way down to the airstrip, was going to take 15 minutes and he would have been gone by then.
Yes. That was the impression I had from the second they talked about this window. Is that was going to be the race against the clock.
I took it as... there are people trained on his house, and he wants to make sure that those people are not paying attention to the house, or at least not able to move until they manage to get far enough away. That's what I took the 15 minutes to be.
But I in no point, no. Like, because you're even saying, like, the FBI are pissed because the local PD are jumping the gun, which means they never expected them to, like, swoop in as if they're coming out to arrest someone. And exactly what are the local PD trying to accomplish? Like, again, I go back to the question, like, so what? You find them with a bunch of this money. That doesn't catch the main guy you want.
Yeah, but that's just it. The PD, I think they didn't know if Verone was actually there or not. I think they were... if I had to guess, and this part is not in the movie, this is not at all, but if I had to guess, the PD is that they know all of this money, all this stuff. This is Verone's, like, stack house. They just brought it in here. They know that if they get the lower level guys connected to Verone, they're hoping that one of them will flip and give them actual Verone.
I think the problem here, I guess the key thing that's a sticking point for me here, is that I don't think they really properly ever get across exactly what the local PD, what their goal is, or what they're trying to accomplish. Right?
Oh yeah, no.
I think that's the problem here, is that I don't understand what they're doing in this scene. Because they're immediately coming after these guys, and they've not really done anything wrong in the context of the scene, so I'm not sure why they're jumping. You know,
it's a problem in this movie is that the local PD is both incompetent because they are unable to see the bigger picture here, but also hyper competent in that they have 700 police cars that are always perfectly ready wherever they need them to be.
But there's also like no inciting moment that's like, okay, this is why we should jump in now and try and arrest them. Well, there's nothing.
I mean, it's just because the way that I saw it was that Verone specifically told this guy, do not get involved. Do not cause the cops to come in. So then when all the cops are saying something's going down, Flass, because I don't know his actual name, Flass says, hey, Verone doesn't want me to get involved. I'm having a crisis of conscience. I'm going to say get involved anyway. Even if it ends up being nothing, if Verone didn't want them to get involved, it's enough for him to say the right thing is to get involved.
I also think there's a poor bit of explanation here because they set up that he's just a detective in charge of the surveillance of Verone's house. They do not imply that he has the power to like hold back the entire force from making a bust. Like that is not set up. So I guess I didn't even really connect like the cops all making their move to him, to be honest, because I didn't think he had that power.
The only thing that told me he did have that power is that someone called in saying there's something going on, and he said, everyone stand down. And then he said, everyone go in. Yeah, that's the only thing that told me he had the power, is that he had the power.
But at the house, he's in charge of surveying the house. This money being picked up somewhere else is nowhere near the house. Why does he have anything to do?
No, he's not surveilling Verone's house. He's not surveilling like the place, the Breaking Bad-esque pool scene and all that stuff. He's not at that location. He's at this other location where Verone is keeping his stuff. Because you could see the undercover cop, the one who was dressed up like trailer trash, she was in the background of most of those shots. They were all keeping track of this particular building because they know it belongs to Verone.
Oh, okay. Well, I messed up. Yeah. I was half asleep or something. I missed.
That's fair.
I did not get that they were watching this place at all. I thought they were watching where Verone lived.
Yeah, no. That's why they were saying there's movement going on right here, because they were doing that. There were also FBI agents and stuff watching Verone's actual place, because one of like the lawns guardmen called in saying like, oh, Verone's on the move.
Okay, actually, so the weird thing about this entire debate is that it actually means my first complaint that I said that I think I figured out and why it was okay is valid again, which is if they thought they were getting 15 minutes of clear time, why did they have this huge plan with like hundreds of people for a distraction?
I have no idea. That doesn't make any sense except they wanted the set piece. I have no answer for that.
Because before the plan goes down, they go to Tej and say, hey, is this the place to like launch this plan? You don't know quite what they're doing yet. And it's basically the plan to confuse the cops into, one, not following them specifically, but also switching to different cars.
Yes, so they can get out of the GPS of the government cars.
Yeah, so, they go into this building, this garage, and I said that weird, garage. I sort of combined the American and UK way of saying garage. But yeah, they go into this garage, and then the doors open, the shutters open, and then just hundreds of like race cars come out. And specifically the cars they were in are being driven by other characters now, and they're in these other cars, which they've rigged the passenger seats because like the bad guys, two goons, who have been very angry looking at the main characters the whole movie, are sitting with them to make sure they still do what they're supposed to. They've fitted those seats with ejector buttons so they can jettison them outside the car.
Which I gotta admit, so there's this whole scene beforehand of them doing some crazy ass driving to be able to get to this point, to get to the part where they do the scramble of all the different cars. And by the time they finish this scene and they escape in different cars, the two goons almost seem to be like buddy-buddy with
Do you know, I almost wish they went further with this. Yeah, like there's this sort of almost gag at this point where they've been so angry, they've wanted to fight the two main characters the whole time, the whole movie. And then after this like moment where they get out, scramble, and they're doing all this fancy driving, there's a moment where like the bald guy sitting next to Brian just turns and goes, hey man, you're a good driver. He's like, thanks, bro. And then they both seem like they're impressed with who they're sitting next to after this point. But then when we get to like the showdown where like they have to kill Brian because like okay, it's time to finish the plan, he just kind of seems like he's back to being himself again.
I mean, yes, but I also like the fact that he didn't just do it out of anger at Brian. He does have that moment to stop and say like, hey man, I'm just doing my job. Like he's justifying it. Sure, it's not going to change the end result, but he's saying like, this is no hard feelings. This is just business.
You've won me over with your driving. You impressed me dearly today, but I must kill you, I'm afraid.
You have made me crap my pants more times than I can count. but
Yes.
you done good, kid.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it feels because they clearly have this plan in mind, and I guess like their idea. I suppose if I'm justifying it, their idea was that they wanted to trick the FBI, so the plan was that they still had to have this scramble to confuse them. Although that wouldn't necessarily need all the other cars, it would just need like them to swap cars with, 2 people.
Yeah.
Right? It wouldn't need the hundreds
But then,
of cars.
there were like 700 police cars chasing after them, which I know they couldn't predict anyway, but apparently they're psychic. That's the only way. You had this many cars to stop all those cops.
Well, that's the key problem, though, is that as far as the plan was concerned, that shouldn't have been happening. So, don't get me wrong. People might just say it's a contingency. And yeah, if they just said we had a contingency in case things go south, that'd be fine. But they never, ever, ever, bring anything like that up.
No.
This just seems to be what the plan was. It almost as if they always expected to be chased by an army of police.
It reminds me slightly, and in a much worse way, but of the most famous drive scene from Baby Driver. If you're familiar with that, where the people who actually rob the bank, they think, okay, we're gonna just take an easy route from A to B, but it's only the driver who has this backup plan of all these crazy things to do in order to shake off the police. It strikes me in that same sort of way.
Yeah, okay. I think it's just because the plan is so elaborate with so many people helping.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you have to, I don't know, it feels like this is still plan A. Like, there's so much involved getting into it that it's just plan A. And it just kind of came off that way to me.
Well, then we get the part where it has to diverge. So Roman pulls the ejector seat on his guy, and he just goes flying out the door. And Brian is about to pull the ejector seat on his guy, but then the guy says, hey, you're going to be taking this different exit. And it's not leading to the airstrip, and it turns out that they're using that as we tricked you, we knew that you were, or we were at least testing you to see if you were part of the feds, and the feds did raid the airstrip at this point, so now they're meeting up somewhere else. Everything's gone south.
Basically he fed Eva Mendes wrong information, so he knows she's dirty, or well, the opposite. He knows she's clean, I guess, because he's dirty. He's the villain, but you know what I mean. And Brian realizes in the moment when he's told this that he got that information from her, so he immediately is like, oh shit, she's in trouble. So he's staying as the hero. He wants to try and save her.
And again, I think this could have been the moment where they finally do that is Eva Mendes duplicitous thing, where it's like, oh, did she purposely feed me wrong information to get me in trouble? But they never play with that, and they immediately shoot it down in the next scene.
No. So yeah, Brian shows up. Of course, the villain was always going to kill them. That's what he even, said earlier on, and Mendes told them that.
And now they're at a boat instead of a plane.
Yes. The alternative route for escaping the country. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, Brian almost gets shot, but Roman shows up to save him last second. Which leads to our other big... So the first big set piece that I said kind of was like a hint of things to come was the truck going over the car. The second big set piece that was hint of things to come, and you realize it's like, wait a minute, the boat's already left the dock, and he's kidnapped Eva Mendes. The villain's going to keep her as a sex slave or something. I don't know what he's going to do, but they're driving off in the boat, and Brian's like racing with Roman in the passenger seat, like down the road next to the water, and it's like, okay, I feel like in my head, I feel like there's only one way to make these two things converge, and it's the car jumping to the boat. And sure enough,
they literally have Roman sit there going like, car, boat, car, crap.
So yes, luckily there's a road that's enough of an incline to, it's the same problem as speed, where it's like they have to jump this big gap, and there shouldn't really be a ramp that sends them up the way, but there is, just because there has to be.
Yeah, whatever.
So yes, he aims the car just right so it lands on the boat, and they get the bad. I mean, that's basically it, because ultimately, the bad guy's kind of knocked down and loopy, and Eva Mendes grabs the gun, and that's it. Final little character point is that Roman was keeping half the money, but then when James Remar sort of like comes through and says, yeah, your record's clean, that's what we said, so he decides to give it over and say, nope, since you were a man of your word, you can have the rest of the money. Although he does keep a little bit of it in his jeans.
Oh yeah, I think that the implication is Brian does too. They're like, yeah, we kind of filled up our pockets beforehand. Tee hee.
Yeah. So they're going
And
to
then there's the
garage.
scene of him basically saying to Ava Mendes, like, "Yeah, no, we're cool, but like we're not actually a thing. So long."
I mean, she looks back at him as she's walking away, which I think was meant to be like, if we get her back for a possible sequel that he's also in, and we can keep it going, as if like, there's still a chance of a romance.
Yeah.
I don't think she ever comes back, though. I could be wrong, but I don't think she
I
does.
mean, I don't. I kind of want to just be surprised. You know, why not? I could look it up. I don't want to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll discover it if it happens. Yeah.
And no post credit scene in this one, thankfully.
No.
Although there is, the first half of the credits is just a PS2 game, like Gran Turismo from back in the day, with the text over top of it, because it is not good special effects.
No, that's okay. It can be cartoony for the titles, though. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's just whatever. Yeah, I think, in talking about the plan, the plot of the movie, I appreciate that it's paced like a heist movie, where it's like, oh, we're building up to this thing and we're going to pull it off, and it achieves that pacing. I do think the actual details are a bit fuzzy, and like why they need two drivers, the fact that we had to sit and debate like exactly the involvement of the police in the third act and how much of that was expected by the characters was a little bit unclear, because it felt like the characters didn't expect anything, but they planned for it as if they did.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing in heist movies, is that you don't want to know the entire plan going into it, but once it's done, you need to feel that you could see how they could plan for everything. And they didn't quite do that for this. I think that they did the police stuff fine. My problem is when it came to that 100-car garage scramble scene. That it felt like there's no way they should have had any reason to think they need that, and yet they did.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I misunderstood when he said they had his eyes on his house. I thought he meant his home, not his safe house or his, his money house.
His flop house.
Yeah, so I never quite got that, and that kind of confused that part of it for me. But, like, otherwise, like, it is better than the first one. It has a little bit more personality, because it feels a bit lighthearted, which it should. It was in dire need of that. But, you still have Paul Walker as the lead, which is not great. His kind of romance with Eva Mendes is not great. There are plot threads that just kind of feel, the villain's quite hammy, which is fine in the context of this type of movie, I suppose, but it never felt like a villain that was personal, and, it felt like it was really trying hard by the end to, like, oh, we're supposed to care because he might hurt Eva Mendes' character, and Brian's going to be the hero to try and like save her. But it was never like a personal thing before then, where it's like, oh, there's a reason for like us, like the main character, to really want to get back at the villain, or it never really became anything more than the simple thing that it was.
I mean, I think the only way you were going to have that is if, like, I don't know, there was some scene where the villain attacked Tej at his garage or something.
Yeah,
for some reason. That's the only way you were ever going to have that motivation.
And he was well liked by all the characters, so that's the sort of character you would do that with. That he came in and like to make a statement, like, oh, you're like, because you set my guy's car on fire, like we're going to come and break his legs or something, and that would be like, okay, now it's like personal. Now they've got a reason to like want to like take this guy down or something.
But nope, they just do it because they're firm believers in law and order, and criminals must be brought to justice unless those criminals are street racing. Then they can escape. So
I guess what I'm saying is it never really felt like the stakes were that high, and when they tried to pretend that they were higher right at the very end, it just kind of felt like, you're just kind of doing this last minute. It doesn't feel like it's built. I mean,
especially because it was in the first movie, there was this whole thing of them trying to stop this heist as it's happening. Like they are stealing things, and it's trying to stop it as it's happening. Whereas in this movie, his whole thing now is he's got the money. He just is trying to escape. He's trying to evade justice. It's not so much as him committing a crime as it is him just leaving. So it feels a little bit less impactful there as well, that they're not racing against the clock to stop like a murder or even just a normal theft.
Yes. Yeah. Which is, again, it was why it's weird they didn't play up the drama of like, which side is she on? Is she actually really super villainous? Like they never really try and play with that. Which I'm not even saying that I would have liked that necessarily. It's just weird that they didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think you said at the beginning. It comes back to they just wanted to have a fun little action movie where you didn't have to worry too much about, oh, where do the allegiances lie? Who can we really trust? It's a no, just you. Anyone that we say is a good guy is a good guy. Anyone we say is a bad guy is a bad guy, and that's all you gotta know.
Honestly, I'm fine with that being the philosophy of the movie. Like, I really am. I think I would just say, well, in that case, you just give me stakes in that the villain is a really bad guy, and have him do something bad that makes us want the heroes to get to him. But I think that's maybe part of the problem, is that up until the last second, it's like, oh, we're just going to run away. We don't really care. And it's just that one last little bit. It's like, oh no, maybe she's in trouble. Maybe we have to go in. So it feels kind of low stakes for a lot of it, just because even though, yeah, okay, he's probably going to kill them, but they're also good drivers. They can just drive away. Like, once they've set up these ejector seats, it's like, okay, they could just jettison them and get gone.
Which I was actually disappointed. I know they played it up for a laugh, quote unquote, of Brian's ejector seat not working. I really wanted to see the ejector seat and what it would do while the car is just sitting still. Because obviously when the car is going 60 miles an hour down the highway, the seat gets pushed out. Things happen because he's tumbling down the highway. I wanted to see what would actually happen when the car is just still. It
would probably still eject him out, but he would just sort of like go woofed and just like fall over. It would just sort of like land right next to the car, obviously.
He wouldn't just go flying 50 feet.
No. Nah. He'd be like right there. Like, Brian would have to like just take off immediately to not get a shot, because the guy would only take like 30 seconds, if that, to sort of compose himself and be like, all right.
Oh, that was a mild inconvenience.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that pretty much does it.
The only thing I want to bring up, because we made such a point of it last movie, is last movie with the ADD soundtrack. I think this one did a much better job at when it played music. It was just the song.
It still had a lot of songs. It was still going for a certain type of soundtrack, but yeah, it didn't feel like it was as erratic in the way it changed between songs. So points where points are due, I suppose.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess we'll rate the movie. What are you giving Too Fast, Too Furious?
I mean, did I think I had fun with it? Yes. Do I think it's a great movie? No. There's not much that can really be said about it in justifying the score. I think I'm just going to give it just a flat 6. I think that it's a turn your brain off and you'll like it sort of thing, but if you go into it looking for anything deeper than that, it's going to disappoint you the whole way down. And if you do think about the plot, oh boy, you're going to have problems with the choices. I have a feeling
that mantra is going to be true for a lot of this franchise.
Yep. So then it just comes down to, then the rating is all going to come down to how enjoyable is it once I turn my brain off.
Yeah, like I say, I still had a lot of, obviously, I don't like Paul Walker as an actor. I think he's really bland, and I think that's an issue for the movie. I think this movie would be helped tenfold if you had like a charismatic lead who, an action star who like carries the movie. Like, if you put, I don't know who you'd put in here as the sort of the stunt driver role, but like there's some movies that Stallone was in, for example, that would probably be under the same level of quality as this, but they're elevated because Stallone's got this presence. He's this guy who, or Arnold or whoever, pick your action star.
Right.
Paul Walker does not do that. In fact, if anything, he actively detracts from the movie. So that plus the plot problems and just the various things we've talked about, I think it just kind of works out to be not offensively bad. I don't think it's good either. So for me, this is a straight 5.
Okay. Fair enough.
So
now the real question, though. Obviously, you were very harsh on the last movie, and I wasn't that fond either, but I was better than you. We came down to a cut from the collection on that. Does this one fare any better?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I don't think it, because I don't think it's good enough to even consider having. I think it's like, it's still it's not a harsh as cut from the collection, but it's still a cut from the collection. I still wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to imagine if I was trying to get Fast and Furious movies, would I be like, yes, Too Fast, Too Furious, the epitome? No. Of course not. And that's I think the bigger issue as we're going to hit this franchise overall, is that this is still in the stumbling period where it's trying to figure out what it is.
I mean,
and as such, none of them are really hitting that hard.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it really just starts at 5, and maybe that's where we'll turn around and start saying, it's more cutting it close now because it's maybe a bit more entertaining. But, yeah, I still think it's cutting. I still wouldn't recommend it.
I'll go with that.
I'm
not that against it.
Oh well, there you go. That is Too Fast, Too Furious. Next time will be The Fast and the Furious. I have to specify the this because there's a sequel that takes the this away. So
there is no reason that any franchise should make you actually clarify the thes and a's, but here we are.
We have to because it's important now for this movie. So yes, The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift is the third movie, and we'll see how that is next time. But yes, let us know what you think of Too Fast, Too Furious in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell, notifications, all that stuff helps us out a lot, of course, and you can support all the content and get bonuses over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Bonus episode for Fast and the Furious. We still don't know what it is because it's a vote, but you'll know by now because it'll be up. So there's a bonus episode at the $3 tier every month that relates in some way to whatever the current theme is on the main show. And at the $5 tier, there's Collector's Cut Extra Reels, which is a So Bad It's Good movie, hopefully, every month that we review. So, yes, we've done things like Dangerous Men, Miami Connection, Deadly Prey, Gone with the Pope. What do you think's this month's entry?
All of them are. I'm not sure Gone with the Pope is this.
No, that was last month's. Yeah, we don't know what this month's.
Yeah,
we don't know what this month's is yet. Yeah, that's fair. But there'll be one. Soon. So, also there's bonuses for other shows as well over on Patreon. But yes, please do. And I'll thank our Patreon producers right now. Thank you to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, board now, Christopher Moy, David Brown, and Al Treisman. Thank you very much to everyone who supports us in any way. So thank you very much. This has been the Collector's Cut. We'll see you next time. Keep watching movies, and to collectors to cut.